Imagine that you and your friend are going door to door to teach people about your church. You meet a nice man who invites you inside, but you say there has to be a woman present. He assures you his wife is in the back baking a pie and you can smell it, so you come inside and sit down. But you soon realize that the candle on the table is the scent of blueberry pie. You're now trapped, your life will never be the same, and this man wants to show you a miracle. This is Heretic, and it stars Hugh Grant, Sophie Thatcher, and Chloe East, and it's being called one of the scariest movies of the year. In this video, I'm going to explain the ending after telling you everything that happens in the movie, because there are articles out there that say Ending Explained, and they've got it completely wrong. I'll explain the ending and even tell you what the writers and directors said about the movie and the ending themselves. And if you're new here, I'm MadMorph, and this is my movie club, where I talk about movies and TV that I like. So please do hit like and subscribe for more like this. Would love to get this channel to 100k, and if you want more of me, you can find my gaming channel and my free audiobooks to help you sleep in the description below this video. Now, let's begin. Heretic. So what happens in this movie, and what's it really about? We need to start at the beginning. This movie is primarily about Sister Paxton and Sister Barnes, who are two women from the Mormon church. We open with them sitting on a bench, and the opening line is about contraception and the size of Magnum condoms. One of the very first lines we hear is Sister Paxton saying, "They're the same size as regular ones. What else do we believe just because of marketing?" And Sister Barnes replies that she heard that they're actually bigger. And weirdly, if you keep this thought in your mind throughout the movie and these opening lines, it will make a lot more sense. When Sister Paxton asks Barnes, "How has God shown you that the church is true?" Barnes replies that she hasn't really thought about it. They head off into town because they're Mormon missionaries, and they are visiting addresses of people who have signed up to hear more about their religion, which is called the Church of Latter-day Saints, or LDS. They walk through the town, mostly being ignored, and then some girls filming a video come over and ask for a picture, but really they're pranking them. They say, "Is it true you wear magic underwear?" And then pants Paxton. They pull her skirt down to reveal her undergarments. A reference to the garments that Mormons wear underneath their clothes. A bit like when you play a video game and you try to take your character's clothes off, but they always have that weird set of underwear on, that's Mormons. They arrive to the next house, with Paxton wiping her tears away, clearly affected by the prank, and they lock their bikes to the front fence and go and knock on the door. Through the entire opening, what's important to note is that Sister Paxton is painted as being this naive believer, kind of the weaker of the two, and Sister Barnes is pointed out as being slightly more aloof, cooler, more confident. She's converted people before, Sister Paxton hasn't. This is the kind of dynamic that these two have. Or at least that's what we think. The door is opened by Mr. Reed. He's holding a watering can and played by Hugh Grant, doing his best impression of 90s Hugh Grant.
Yeah.
His name could be a reference to the word mystery, Mr. Reed, mystery.
Mr. Reed.
The same way that the Riddler sometimes goes by Edward Nigma or Enigma. It's a bit of a play on words and shows what he thinks of himself. Mr. Reed has previously signed up to hear more about the church, so we can assume that he's expecting them to arrive. He remarks that it's raining and that they want to continue the conversation inside. They say they can't enter and be in the house without a woman present, but he says his wife is inside baking a pie, so they agree to come in. He asks to take their jackets. They say yes and hand them over. He says, "I hope you don't mind, but the walls and ceilings have metal in." They say, "We don't mind." What you need to know is that every single question he asks is a test, and what for will become clear later. He leaves them to check on the snacks and exits the room. The girls, being left alone in the room, look around, and Sister Barnes looks at a butterfly on a small hexagon-shaped glass window. It flies away from the window and up to the light in the ceiling and dinks and donks its head on the lampshade, symbolic of a moth to the flame, which is also kind of like these girls. The butterfly has stopped following the real light outside the window and flown up to the fake light in the ceiling and trapped itself. Mr. Reed comes back without the pie. He sits down and talks to the girls about religion and faith at length. This is a big conversation and forms the core concept for this movie. Here are the important parts to take away from it. Sister Paxton was born in the church while Sister Barnes' mother was a convert. They converted after her father passed away, and they auditioned a number of religions to see if they still believed. This resonates with Mr. Reed, who says he knows that feeling very well. His personal struggle is trying to find what the one true religion is. Through the course of the conversation, we find out that Mr. Reed knows a lot about Mormonism and religion at large. He starts to question the girls more than they are here selling him the idea of converting. He asks Barnes if she has seen any sign of her father since he passed. She says no, and Mr. Reed says that's strange, and his eyes glance to a scar on her upper arm. Both of these points are really important, but we'll come back to them later as not to spoil the story. Keep them in your head. They talk on. Following that convo, Paxton says, "When I die, I'll come back as a butterfly. I'll land right on the hand of my loved ones so they know it's me." At that moment, the lights go out. Mr. Reed says it's a foible of the house, but we do find out shortly after that it's on a timer. He leaves the room and we hear it ticking down after he turns the lights back on. It shows that everything he's doing is controlled and set to a strict schedule. The conversation continues with him saying, "I should have offered you water. Doesn't your religion forbid caffeine and alcohol?" To which Barnes says it doesn't specifically mention soda, we're just not that thirsty. Again, this points to what we know, given that Mr. Reed seems to be this expert on their religion, it is a conscious choice that he made to serve them Coca-Cola instead of water. Every step of the way, every single thing he does is a test of their beliefs. The conversation then turns a bit weird as he asks them about polygamy, with Mr. Reed showing his disdain for the way that Mormons once did practice polygamy but don't anymore, saying he believes it was all just made up because the founder wanted to excuse an affair that he had. It's a slightly uncomfortable conversation as Barnes and Reed start to slightly argue about what it means to Mormonism, and she eventually says, "We'll raise it with our bishop and get back to you," as if she's about to sort of wrap things up and leave, and he intervenes very quickly saying, "What's your favorite food?" He's immediately interrupting that sort of pattern that might lead to them leaving, prolonging the conversation and trapping them in the house for longer. They say that Wendy's is the best, but they never talk about Taco Bell. You'll find out why later on. Mr. Reed says that he wants to find the Wendy's of religions, the best of the best, but what he found is that the more that you know, the less you know. He has studied theology and found that every sect, cult, religion, and faith of the world is claiming to be the one true doctrine, but none of them are when he looks deeply into them. He wondered what else was out there, and that he has discovered the one true religion. It's really starting to take on a sinister tone, and the girls ask, "Can we meet your wife, please?" So he leaves the room. When he does, he turns the light switch and the lights come back on, and we hear that gentle ticking, signifying that the timer has started again. This entire opening very much plays out like a play on a stage. We've got 3 characters, we've got 1 location, and we've got a lot of dialogue, but it's absolutely thrilling. The girls are getting a little suspicious, and they plan to wrap it up and head back. But when she turns the candle on the table, she discovers that that is the scent of the blueberry pie. There is no pie, there might not even be a wife, and they've been tricked. Mr. Reed enters, saying his wife is ready for them now, and to follow him. He goes down a dark hallway, but Barnes pretends to get a phone call saying that they need a minute. The girls are looking for an exit. They're starting to panic, but the front door is locked and they can't get it open. They find that their phone has no signal. They're stuck. They're trapped. The timer on the light goes out again, and they've got no option but to pass down a dark hallway to find Mr. Reed. Finding Mr. Reed in another room in the back that looks like a study or a library filled with books and studious things, they say politely that they'll be leaving, and he points to their jackets and they pick them up. Barnes finds that the key for the bicycle lock is missing, but Paxton finds the key in her pocket. This alerts them that Mr. Reed has gone through their pockets and put the key back in the wrong one by accident. Or did he? He pokes them a little over making an excuse about leaving, saying, "I told you that the walls and ceilings have metal in. It blocks signal. I know you didn't make a call, so you can leave whenever you want. There's no need for excuses." They once again ask to meet his wife, and he pretends like he's going to leave to go and find her, and then he turns and says, "Do you still believe my wife is in the next room, despite all the evidence to the contrary?" He relates this to God. Do you believe in God just because you were told at an impressionable age, despite seeing evidence to the contrary your whole life? Do you go on believing something that is untrue just to give you the comfort? He says that the scented candle was a test. I wanted you to think about what you believe just because someone tells you. At this point, Barnes has had enough and she's like, we're going to go now, we're leaving through the back of your house, and she opens the left side door and looks upset by what she sees. She goes to the right side door and opens that and looks down, and we see that it leads to the basement. They ask for his help to choose which door to go through. He agrees, and there is then a very long scene and monologue where he shows that the board game Monopoly is a rip-off of a game called Landlord, while he plays the song All I Need Is the Air That I Breathe by the Hollies, saying that the three big religions are derivatives of each other, just like versions of Monopoly. Judaism is the oldest, then Christianity, then Islam, and then the Book of Mormon. He explains that Radiohead was sued by the Hollies for plagiarism because Creep is similar to The Air That I Breathe, and then Lana Del Rey was sued by Radiohead for plagiarizing Creep in her song Get Free. The point being that there are just iterations after iterations after iterations which dilute the message and obscure the original. Continuing to prove his point, talking about ancient religions, the similarities they bear to the story of Jesus, how many of them share the exact same story, how many of them have their hero born on the 25th of December, from Egyptians to Star Wars and the Phantom Menace. Mr. Reed writes on one door, belief, and on the other, disbelief, saying if you still believe in your God, go through the belief door. If you don't, go through the disbelief door. Sister Paxton says they should go through the disbelief door, saying, oh, how smart you are, Mr. Reed, you've really convinced us, hoping to placate him, seeing that this whole thing seems to be tearing down religion as nonsense, and that she should just agree with him and get it out of the way. But Sister Barnes points out that the only thing that matters right now is what they actually believe. She argues with Mr. Reed, says there are some fallacies and holes in his story, that belief is a spectrum which he is neglecting, saying, let's leave through the belief door. Do you believe in God, Sister Paxton? Let's be honest that we believe in God and let God decide what's next for us. They exit and go down into the basement where they are trapped in the dark. The simple fact is, both of these doors go to the exact same place, and Mr. Reed just wanted to see which one they would go through. He's basically a really verbose and self-righteous version of Jigsaw. He wants to play his little mind games rather than physical games with gore, and he's just testing you the whole way through. They look for a way to escape, trying to pull open a window, which results in them having a sort of plank of wood with some nails sticking out of it, but there is no escape, so Barnes gives Paxton a knife that she swiped from upstairs, a letter opener. She says the code word is magic underwear. If she says that, then Paxton needs to attack him. It has to be Paxton because he's watching Barnes too closely. But then things take a very dark turn. A strange woman draped in robes comes shambling in. She's carrying a lantern and a pie. She places the pie on the table and stretches and cracks her back weirdly before slowly curling up on the floor. Mr. Reed is upstairs writing down the exact timings of everything that has happened so far. He communicates with the girls not through a speaker but through a pipe that goes down into the basement, and he says, you are in the presence of a living prophet of God. You are about to witness a miracle. That the woman in the room with them will eat the pie, which is poisoned, and then she will come back to life. He needs them to be witnesses to this, to verify this miracle, and then they will know the one true religion. The woman looks horrifically unwell. She's gaunt. She's like a frail ghoul, and she sits and eats the pie and dies. Mr. Reed instructs them to feel for a pulse and confirm that she's gone, and she is. A bell rings loudly because someone from the church has come to the house to see for the missing girls. They were supposed to be home by now, and they came by here. The man from the church is played by Topher Grace, but Mr. Reed says, nope, nobody came here, as the girls try again to escape. They've come up from the basement to scream under the door, and are trying to pull a rug which has some matches on it, hoping to set a fire. Mr. Reed just keeps making excuses, saying the girls never came here, and the man leaves. The girls get some of the matches and go back downstairs. What's important here is that Paxton notices that the woman has moved slightly. But Barnes is focused on lighting the matches and starting a fire as a signal. Behind them, the previously dead woman has resurrected and is over the shoulder of Paxton for pretty much the only kind of jump scare in this movie. The resurrected prophet now recounts what she saw whilst dead in the afterlife, saying she saw clouds but not clouds, angels, and ends the conversation by saying it's not real. At that point, Mr. Reed comes down and takes the prophet back to her room. And when Mr. Reed returns, he questions the girls about the miracle that they just witnessed, saying, "I can show you God. I can bring you back after you die." Sister Barnes at that point has worked out what he's trying to do, or so she thinks. She says he's trying to convince them that dying is their idea, and that it wasn't a miracle, it was a magic trick. She brings up Taco Bell, saying that when she was 4, she got E. coli from it, and she died in surgery. That what she saw whilst having a near-death experience is exactly what the prophet described. She says, "Your mind creates unbelievable things when the oxygen leaves your brain and your heart stops pumping. That he has kept this woman close to death to ask her his meaningless questions on his quest to find the one true religion, and that it's not real." This verbal attack from Barnes is actually a distraction as she turns Mr. Reed away from Paxton and then goes to say the magic word so she can attack him with the knife. But the second she goes to say magic underwear, he quickly slashes Barnes's throat and she falls to the ground. Paxton freaks out, but Mr. Reed says it's okay, she'll come back just like the prophet. It'll prove to Paxton that it's real. But when Barnes doesn't come back to life, he pivots his theory. He says, "Oh, she's an NPC." He cuts an implant out of her arm and says it's a chip, showing that she wasn't a real person and that's why she can't come back. Paxton is in full survival mode and she says, "Oh, could you explain it to me?" He goes on to say that reality is a simulation and talks about simulation theory, the idea that the world isn't real and we're experiencing a simulation. He recounts a philosophical question of the butterfly dream. Am I a man dreaming of a butterfly, or a butterfly dreaming that I'm a man? He asks her what she thinks. She says, this isn't a microchip, it's a contraceptive. She says she doesn't believe his simulation theory, and that she doesn't believe in his miracle. That she feels like he's improvising, because the prophet said it's not real. She went off script, and now he's got to change his story to this simulation theory. She accuses him of switching the bodies, that the woman at the table was not the same woman that died. Another one came in, removed the body and took her place, read his scripted prophecy, but she tried to warn us by saying it's not real. She meant the miracle. Mr. Reed says, well, if that's true, there's got to be a secret way into the basement. Shall we have a look? And Paxton investigates and finds a hatch in the floor. Mr. Reed says only go down there if you want to know what the one true religion is. Paxton says she wants to know the truth and climbs down. She finds the prophet's dead body, which proves that she was right, but Mr. Reed shuts her in. She's now in a creepy underground tunnel, opening door after door, and each room that she goes through is filled with different religious paraphernalia, paintings, books, bones, sigils, runes. When she comes to the last door, it is locked with her own bike lock. The key that's in her pocket opens it and she exits. It takes her into an area where she finds women kept in cages in freezing temperatures, most likely previous missionaries from different religions that he has tricked into being in there. At this point, Mr. Reed comes in and he's acting like he has won. But Paxton says she knows why the key ended up in her jacket pocket and not Barnes's where it was supposed to be. It was intentional. He wanted her to know that she survived and got out with the key because he wanted her to, that she had no choice in ending up where she is standing right now. She's standing there because Mr. Reed designed it that way, because he made it happen. This lets us know that by the time they had retrieved the jackets, Mr. Reed had already decided that he was going to kill Barnes and Paxton would be the one to survive. Paxton answers that control is the one true religion. Reed says, you're right, religion is control. He says that the women in the cages choose to be there, that the woman ate the pie because she chose to, because of her faith, that she drank the Kool-Aid. She says, why do you do this? And he says, why do you let me do this? He says he's been able to predict every decision that she's made tonight because of her indoctrination from a young age. The church has dictated every move of her life. They've even dictated wearing her magic underwear. And the second he says magic underwear, she stabs backwards over her shoulder and gets him in the throat. It's a really nice callback that he says the code word that they decided earlier, and she uses this as the moment to attack him. Now Paxton is trying to escape, running through the house and trying to find a way out. She looks at some artwork on the wall and the camera really focuses in on this, and it's a picture from Dante's Inferno, Botticelli's map of hell. She can't find a way out, only doorways that lead back down to the basement, and she finds herself standing over the hatch she went down, but it's open. Before it was closed, so now she knows that Mr. Reed came back that way, and as she turns around, he stabs her in the stomach. She falls back into the corner, and so does he, still bleeding from the neck. They both are on the floor, bleeding out together. Mr. Reed instructs her to pray. Pray for us, he says. It's unknown if this is sort of mocking or genuine. It seems to be said both ways, and Hugh Grant said he actually filmed 2 endings. One where the character was meant to be really scared, and one where he was still mocking her and having fun in his own death. So I think that kind of confusion exists intentionally. You don't really know what he means because they're using different shots from different takes. But then Paxton says to him, haven't you heard of the Great Prayer Experiment? They divided patients into groups, those who received prayers and those who didn't, and it made no difference. Prayer doesn't work. But she still thinks it's beautiful that we pray, even though it doesn't make a difference. The whole time she's talking, Mr. Reed is crawling towards her on the floor, and the knife is in his hand. Paxton begins to pray for them both. As she's praying with her eyes closed and her hands clasped, Mr. Reed leans into her shoulder and starts to sob. He seems to be somewhat comforted by the prayer, despite his entire life work and this entire movie being him trying to prove that religion is completely meaningless and a form of control. In this moment, he submits to her and her religion in some way. She is now in control. She prays for them and he has submitted to her. For the first time, he is vulnerable, buried in her shoulder, sobbing like a little boy. Collecting himself, though, he backs up slightly and stares at her eye to eye. He holds the knife at her neck, and he's about to end her when he gets hit in the head by something. Paxton looks up to see Barnes. She's back from the dead, just long enough to save Paxton's life. She hit him with the wood with the nail sticking out of it, and then dies again right in front of Paxton. A miracle, perhaps? We'll get into it. This gives Paxton a chance to escape, and she heads upstairs to the main room, examining a replica of the building on Reed's desk. She uses this to find the way out of the house, which is a grated window. She gets out and makes her way into the back garden. It's snowing. There's long grass and flowers covered with snow, and they're white like clouds. She falls to her knees and looks down at her hand and sees a butterfly on it. But in the very next shot, there is no butterfly there. Paxton looks up with an unsure face, and the movie ends. The end credits roll with a version of Knocking on Heaven's Door to the tune of Fade Into You by Mazzy Star, which is another nod to the dialogue earlier about iterations and music copying each other, being a reference to religion. So what did it all mean? Was the butterfly her friend come back to life, or did it mean something else? Did she escape, or did she actually never make it out of the basement? Let's dive into the questions that people have about this film and what the writers and directors say themselves. If you haven't already, now is a great time to hit that like and subscribe button, and if you have any questions that don't get covered, drop them in a comment below, and I'm sure someone will come along with an answer. This is a movie club, and we're all talking about this movie, giving our opinions and sharing in the comments below. Now let's get into the questions. The meaning of the butterfly, what the ending meant, what the 2 versions and possible meanings of the ending are, why was Paxton suddenly so smart, why did he kill Barnes and try to keep Paxton alive, and what's up with the women in the cages. There are 2 ways that people are interpreting what happened at the end, so let's go through them both, and then you can tell me in a comment which one you think is real, or which one you felt was what was going on when you were watching it. The first one we'll call the good ending. Barnes comes back to life. It's a miracle. She was dead and has been dead for some time in the basement, but resurrects just long enough to save her friend. It is a miraculous, religious, and uplifting kind of ending. Her friend saves her life, she escapes the house, sees the butterfly as a callback to what she said she would do to let her loved ones know she was there. She feels loved, perhaps it's her friend from the beyond, but why doesn't it appear in the next scene? Maybe it's just because it's this message from the beyond and she kind of sees it while she's connected with the spiritual side. We can then assume Paxton calls the police, is saved, and saves the women in the cage. And this is actually the ending that I've seen quite a lot of articles describe as happening in the film and not going on to this second one. So let's talk about ending number 2, or what we will call the true ending. Paxton dies in the basement, either by bleeding out during prayer or by being stabbed by Mr. Reed. Everything from the moment that he gets hit by Barnes is not real. It's happening in Paxton's head as she dies. It's a callback to the Taco Bell conversation and the near-death experience stories. What happens when you die? Barnes literally says your mind creates unbelievable things when the brain stops getting oxygen and the heart stops pumping. What we witness in the last 5 minutes is Paxton's dying hallucination. It's of her friend resurrecting to save her, a miracle, her leaving the basement, inspecting the model and finding the exit. Why would that model have an exit on it if he never wanted anyone to leave? She climbs out the window into what looks like the afterlife described by the prophet, a snow-covered garden supplementing for white clouds that aren't clouds. She hallucinates a butterfly on her hand because this is what Paxton herself said that she would do if she died. Therefore, the butterfly on her hand is in her head already, created by her own brain in this moment as a symbolic visualization of her own death. Her confused look when the butterfly is not there, perhaps a moment of realization, but also a reference to the dissociation that Barnes describes that you have when you are dying, the feeling that things aren't real. The credits rolling is when Paxton actually dies and was knocking on heaven's door. Now, which of those do you think is more likely? I think when you lay them out on paper, it seems entirely more likely that the second true ending is really what they were going for, and Paxton died in the basement. That is a really grim thought when you consider that probably the women in the cages will never make it out. They're going to have some pretty grim endings in there. But here's where things get interesting. The writer and the director want it to be this way. They want you to discuss with your friends and talk about which ending you think is real. Do you believe or do you disbelieve? They've created a meta conversation outside of the movie which represents the contents of the movie itself. They said, it's an ending by design to leave it with the audience. That's really it. The ambition is to deliver questions and not to necessarily deliver an answer. What's been really engaging for us is to hear how many people have multiple interpretations of what the ending means, how that intersects with their own sense of self and their own sense of how they view the world. They said they were inspired by David Mamet's Oleana, which legend has it had people getting into fights as they left the theatre talking about what they had seen. They weren't trying to critique belief or disbelief, but the idea of certainty. To claim that you know that the one true religion is X and everyone else is wrong, or that there is no religion and that religion is crazy. They wanted to put the idea of certainty under the microscope. They have created an unknown and uncertain ending to emphasize that. If you look at the ending through the lens of the miracle and her friend coming back, it is a beautiful and uplifting ending. I found it quite moving my first time watching. You think, wow, this is really powerful. The music swells, you get a little bit of a tear in your eye, and then her friend saves her, the butterfly glitches out, and you go, oh no, was that real? Did I just see something real, or was that all in her head? You have to go back and watch again, and then it's left for you to decide. But what do you think happened? What did you think when you first watched it, and what do you think now? Did you know that when Mr. Reed asks Barnes if she's had any sign of her father since he passed, that was him testing her suitability to fall for his tricks? The fact that she hadn't experienced something wasn't strange because he believed in an afterlife or that she should have seen a ghost. It was strange to him because if she was a true believer or a naive and spiritual woman as he expects her to be, she would have interpreted anything in her life as a sign from her father. She would have said, oh yeah, like on the day of his funeral a bird landed next to me and I knew that was him, or we saw a rainbow on his birthday. One of those most likely innocuous coincidences that occur in our lives that we apply meaning and kismet to. She hadn't done this, so by simply saying no, and him noticing the implant scar on her arm for contraception, he realizes that this is not the right girl for his purposes. I think it's at this moment that he decides that he'll be getting rid of Barnes and focusing on Paxton, which is why he leaves the key in Paxton's jacket pocket. Because up to this point, she's been coming across as incredibly naive and a full faith believer, and very, very polite. She acquiesces to Mr. Reed all the time. But he's wrong about this too. I've seen some people comment that they didn't like how Paxton went from being really naive to being super smart and working everything out like she's some sort of detective. But they, like Reed, missed the point. Paxton knows from early on that Mr. Reed is dangerous and not telling the truth. She says, "I noticed when you came back in the first time checking on the snacks, you had wet in your hair, you had been out in the storm." Also at one point, we see her being super polite and placating and naive with Mr. Reed, but the camera focuses on a bead of sweat on her temple. This lets us know that she is terrified and she understands the danger she is in. They represent the two types of tactics that women might have to employ when dealing with men on their own or of this nature. While Barnes challenges, she shows that she's smart and she stands up to Reed, Paxton is the nervous laugh. She is the fawning response and the kind of, "If I'm polite and I smile and I laugh at your jokes, will you please not hurt me? You're so very smart, Mr. Reed. Well, I'll just be going now." And any girl that's had any unwanted attention will have immediately recognized this. It isn't until she realizes that all is lost that she actually changes her tactic and goes more the way of Barnes. She feigns crying with her back turned, and when he's gloating over her, stabs him in the throat. This allows her that opening, that fawning response, and him underestimating her. She was always that smart. She was just hiding it as a survival trait. So who are the women in the cages, and why does he even do this? The women in the cages are the former victims. They are like a Sister Barnes or a Sister Paxton who didn't work out what was going on. He keeps them there under his control, and every time he catches a new fly in his web, he does the pie miracle trick to convince them, to induct them into his own little cult of control. The woman who witnesses the miracle usually join him willingly, it seems, but this time Paxton has figured it out. He designed his sick house and trap to test the faith of the women and capture them in his cult. It begs the question, what did he mean when he asked the girls at the start, "How do you feel about polygamy?" Does he consider these women in the cages his wives? It doesn't seem like his intentions are purely for mocking religion, because why does he only catch women then? The character of Mr. Reed doesn't have a righteous cause. He's not trying to tear down Christianity or teach anybody anything. He simply enjoys control and has found a great outlet for it. The house is his own little cult prison, and what we saw was the test that he puts people through to decide whether he will end them or induct them into a cage to become one of his wives. Overall, I really enjoyed this movie. I had been waiting to see this one since the first trailer dropped, and it lived up to my expectations and went in directions that I wasn't expecting. All of the performances were great, from Hugh Grant, Sophie Thatcher, Chloe East, and it's funny how Topher Grace plays the elder who checks up on them from the church. I wonder if that's just a fun cameo, or perhaps a way to make you think he's going to play a bigger role, that he'll save the girls, but really when he gets there, he's just a simple, trusting, and perhaps not so intelligent man who's easily explained away by the villain. Honestly, the only thing that I would have actually cut down from this movie was every time we cut away to him in the church and realizing that the girls were missing. It somehow kind of deflated some of the tension. We could have easily met this elder character the same time as Mr. Reed when the doorbell rings. It would have been much more of a, "Oh my god, who's that at the door" moment than it was. I think they were trying to create this sense of hope with you as an audience member that he was going to save the day, and then when he doesn't, you sort of feel the hopelessness and the helplessness watching it and the girls still being trapped, but for me, I just would have cut those out. But what did you think of Heretic? Let me know in a comment your reviews, which of the endings you liked, and hit that like and subscribe. I'd also love to know what movies you'd like to see me cover and what movies you've been watching recently. What's good out there? Let's get some recommendations for everyone in the comments below. I've been MadMorph, and this has been my movie club, and this was Heretic. There are some other videos on the screen if you want to check out something else with me right now, or like I said, check out my gaming channel or my free audiobooks to help you sleep in the description below this video. Until next time, thank you, and good night.
Mr. Reed.